Hey everyone, throughout this video I will be summarizing and analyzing the content of a story called The Grand Inquisitor. The story of the Grand Inquisitor can be found in a book written by Fyodor Dostoevsky called The Karamazov Brothers. And as you will see towards the end of this video, I think that Fyodor Dostoevsky really tried to warn us with this story. So The Karamazov Brothers is a really interesting book on its own. Its main story depicts the tale of three brothers, Dmitri, Ivan and Alyosha, whose father has been violently murdered. And throughout the book, the reader will be wondering which of these brothers may have been the guilty one. These three brothers, they differ widely from each other. Each of them has a vastly different character and they differ in their religious and philosophical viewpoints. So Dmitri is a really passionate and impulsive person, while Ivan is intellectual and a religious skeptic, and Alyosha is a deeply religious monk. These varying viewpoints, they lead to interesting conversations between these brothers throughout the book. And The Grand Inquisitor is a story written by Ivan, who shares his story with Alyosha. So the story of the Grand Inquisitor is set in Sevilla in Spain in the 16th century during the Spanish Inquisition. In the story, Christ suddenly appears on the streets of Sevilla, and even though Christ does not say anything throughout the entire story, his resurrection, and especially the response to his resurrection, creates an interesting situation. Within the story, Ivan explains how after so many years of waiting, some people have started to lose their faith in Christ, and they have started to spread doubt, while some other people they remained faithful. But those who remained faithful were all the more ardent in their faith. The tears of humanity rose up to him as before, awaited his coming, loved him, hoped for him, yearned to suffer and die for him as before. So the main character in the poem is the Grand Inquisitor, who is the cardinal who during his reign orders many heretics to be burned. And the reader would therefore suspect that the Grand Inquisitor, who is capable of murdering many for Christ, would be more than pleased when Christ would actually return. However, as we will see, Christ's resurrection creates a problematic situation for the Inquisitor as well as the Church in general. Christ, he makes his appearance in Sevilla the day after almost 100 heretics have been burned in his name. He came softly, unobserved, and yet, strange to say, everyone recognized him. The people are irresistibly drawn to him. They surround him, they flock about him, follow him. He moves silently in their midst with a gentle smile of infinite compassion. The sun of love burns in his heart, light and power shine from his eyes, and their radiance shine on the people, stirs their hearts with responsive love. Upon his return in Sevilla, Christ performs several miracles. For instance, he makes a blind man see again, and he brings back to life a young child who has died. The Grand Inquisitor witnesses all these miracles, however he orders Christ to be arrested. And the people there are so used to submission to whatever the Grand Inquisitor expects of him, that they silently accept the arrest of Christ and they move on with their lives. The Grand Inquisitor visits Christ in his cell and tells him that he will be burned at the stake as a heretic the next day. The Grand Inquisitor argued, "Why then art thou come to hinder us? For thou hast come to hinder us, and thou knowest that. Or dost thou know what will be tomorrow? I know not who thou art and care not to know whether it is thou or only a semblance of him. But tomorrow I shall condemn thee and burn thee at the stake as the worst of heretics." The Grand Inquisitor continues to argue that the people will join him in his condemnation of Christ because he is so powerful and they will do whatever he will order of them. The Grand Inquisitor then explains to Christ, who still continues to remain silent, that Christ made a mistake 1500 years ago. According to the Inquisitor, Christ made people free, which, according to the Inquisitor, was too much of a burden for the people to bear. He continues to indicate that the Church has to finish what Christ could not finish. According to the Inquisitor, the Church has made the people absolutely free by taking their freedom from them and controlling it for them. For 15 centuries we have been wrestling with thy freedom, but now it is ended for good. Now today people are more persuaded than ever that they have perfect freedom, yet they have brought their freedom to us and laid it humbly at our feet. Christ's return would disrupt this progress made by the Church according to the Inquisitor. Thou didst reject the only way by which man might be made happy, but fortunately, departing, thou didst hand on the work to us. Thou hast promised, thou hast established thy word, thou hast given to us the right to bind and to unbind, and now, of course, thou canst not think of taking it away. Why then hast thou come to hinder us? The Great Inquisitor then begins to address the three temptations or three questions that were set out to Christ by Satan during Christ's temptation in the desert. The Grand Inquisitor is explicit in the weight he believes these questions have. From those questions alone, from the miracle of their statement, we can see that we have here to do not with the fleeting human intelligence, but with the absolute and eternal. For in those three questions the whole subsequent history of mankind is, as it were, brought together into one whole and foretold, and in them are united all the unsolved historical contradictions of human nature. The Inquisitor argued that Christ made a mistake in his response to these three temptations, or questions from the devil. So Satan tempted Christ to turn stones into bread by arguing that the people would follow him wherever he went if they witnessed this miracle. It would give Christ immense power. Christ, however, thought that this would cost the people their freedom. Thou wouldst not deprive man of freedom and didst reject the offer, thinking, what is that freedom worth if obedience is bought with bread? Christ argued that people live not only by bread. The Inquisitor, however, indicated that this was a mistake, because he argued that the people simply wanted to be fed, even if it were to cost them their freedom. In the end, they will lay their freedom at our feet and say to us, make us your slaves, but feed us. The bread of heaven would, according to the Grand Inquisitor, not compare to the earthly bread, because the human race is weak and sinful and only wants what is in front of him. Furthermore, he argued, only a handful of people would follow Christ in his pursuit for the bread of heaven. He asks Christ what he would do with the millions that are not strong enough and remain hungry while they wait for the heavenly. The Inquisitor argues that the Church cares for the numerous and weak and will make a huge sacrifice in their name. They will marvel at us and look on us as gods, because we are ready to endure the freedom which they have found so dreadful and to rule over them. So awful it will seem to them to be free, but we shall tell them that we are thy servants and rule them in thy name. We shall deceive them again, for we will not let thee come to us again. That deception will be our suffering, for we shall be forced to lie. Therefore, the Inquisitor argues he will be doing the people a favor by condemning Christ to death. The second temptation was that Satan tempted Christ to jump from a temple, for if Christ were really the Son of God, angels would save him. When the wise and the dead spirits set thee on the pinnacle of the temple and said to thee, if thou wouldst know whether thou art the Son of God, then cast thyself down, for it is written, the angels shall hold him up lest he fall and bruise himself. And thou shalt know then whether thou art the Son of God, and shall prove then how great is thy faith in thy Father. Christ refused the second temptation as well. By refusing to enact such a miracle, the Grand Inquisitor argued that Christ did not fulfill the wishes of man. For man seeks not so much God as the miraculous, and as man cannot bear to be without the miraculous, he will create new miracles of his own for himself, and will worship deeds of sorcery and witchcraft, though he might be 100 times over a rebel, heretic and infidel. The Grand Inquisitor therefore argued that Christ, by not embodying the miraculous, planted the seeds for heresy in man. It was now up to the Church to correct this mistake. And with the third temptation, Christ was offered to rule over all the kingdoms of the earth. Hadst thou accepted that last gift of the mighty Spirit, thou wouldst have accomplished all that man seeks on earth, that is, someone to worship, someone to keep his conscience, and some means of uniting all in one unanimous and harmonious ant heap. For the craving for universal unity is the third and last anguish of man. As long as this universal unity is not achieved, man will continue to strive for it, according to the Inquisitor. Thereby, universal peace can never be achieved if there is no universal unity. The Inquisitor argued that Christ had the possibility to achieve universal peace, but was too proud to accept this gift. The Grand Inquisitor observed therefore that man has three desires: obedience, miracles, and worship. Christ, by accepting the three temptations discussed just now, had the possibility to fulfill these three desires for men. By refusing Satan, however, Christ doomed mankind to eternal insecurity, struggle, and emptiness. According to the Inquisitor, the Church stepped in to correct this mistake made by Christ and offered men someone to obey, provided men with miracles, and gave them someone to worship. In this sense, the Inquisitor, by reversing the actions taken by Christ, thought that he was doing mankind a favor. After the Inquisitor had finished making these arguments towards Christ, he waited for Christ to answer him. Christ, however, remained silent, until he suddenly approached the old man in silence and softly kissed him on his bloodless aged lips. That was all his answer. The Inquisitor then decided to free Christ, ordering him never to return. So what is the meaning of this kiss? I'm not sure how to interpret the kiss, and I suppose it is up to the reader to decide its true meaning. Was Christ grateful to the Inquisitor for correcting his mistakes, or was Christ simply trying to show that love would eventually win? The question that we can ask ourselves after reading the story of the Grand Inquisitor is, what would happen if Christ were to return today? Even if a savior may come, he might be silenced because he might be too much of a disruptive force to the status quo. Dostoevsky was himself deeply religious, so I do not think that the story is therefore in any sense anti-religious. Instead, I believe that the story tells us that we should be mindful that the institutions that we have created to represent our best interests might eventually act contrary to our interests because they want to maintain their power. This might be the case with religious institutions, but also with governments, for example. What makes it more complicated, however, is that these institutions, similarly to the Church and the Grand Inquisitor in the story, might think that they are doing mankind a favor by taking away their freedom. And who knows, perhaps they are doing mankind a favor. They have set up gods and challenged one another, put away your gods and come and worship ours, or we will kill you and your gods. And so it will be to the end of the world. Even when gods disappear from the earth, they will fall down before idols just the same. Please let me know in the comments how you would interpret the story of the Grand Inquisitor. And if you enjoy this kind of content, then please also consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. Thank you.